has challenged the norm. And even here after his death, Jesus is still challenging the norm. I want you to think about, just in your life, what we commonly refer to as pivotal circumstances or pivotal moments in your life. And it could be that moment in which you decided who you were going to marry, that moment in your life in which you decided which college you were going to go to, or that moment in your life when you decided which job you were going to take. And you know that these pivotal moments in our life really sometimes change the course of direction in our life for the rest of our lives. And just this past month, there was a celebration of a pivotal moment that happened in our world. It was 30 years ago, you may remember this, 30 years ago when the Berlin Wall was taken down. It was a pivotal moment in our world. I remember I was in 11th grade in high school. It makes some of you feel really old, right? I was in 11th grade in high school when this happened. And I remember our history teacher telling us, saying, this is a moment in which it's going to change the course, the direction of our world for the rest of history. And that was the day in which we saw the fall of communism, and really our world transformed after that. It changed. And so we have those pivotal moments that are sometimes personal to us, but we have sometimes those personal moments that are more historical. And sometimes they don't always cross over one to the other. Sometimes my personal pivotal moments aren't always historical. They're not going to change the course of the history of the world. But there is a moment here that we're going to read about in Mark chapter 16 that was both historical as well as personal. It was a historical pivotal moment in which when Jesus got up and he walked out of that tomb, it changed history forever. But it's also that time in which it changed me personally, and hopefully you have experienced the same thing, when I trusted and I put my faith in the resurrection of Jesus Christ for my everlasting life. It was a pivotal moment. Think about that. One day there was death. The next day there was life. One day there was sadness. The next day there was joy. One day there was no hope. The next day there was hope. It was a day that really just changed everything. And that's what we're going to look at here this morning in Mark's Gospel, Mark chapter 16. He describes for us this pivotal moment. And it is what we commonly refer to as the good news. But I want you to see this morning that it's only good news because it's true news. Right? If it was fake news that we hear about a lot in our society today, if it was not true, this news that the tomb is empty is not good. It's good news only because it's true news. And I've told you as we walk through here that Mark is writing this to believers who are living in Rome and they're being persecuted. And we looked last week about at the death that Jesus died on the cross, and his pain was our gain. He died so that we could live. It was there that he paid the penalty for our sins. Now, if Mark had just concluded this account of Jesus' life, if the cross were really the end, we have no hope. But he's writing to encourage these believers that you have hope. Even though you're experiencing tremendous persecution, there is hope because the cross was not the end. The tomb was not the end. That he is alive, finally, fully, and forever. And I want you to just think about for just a moment about the implications of the empty tomb. If the resurrection is real, if it's true, there's a lot of other implications. If the tomb is empty, that means that God is real. If the tomb is empty, that means the Bible is true. If the tomb is empty, that means that Jesus is God. If the tomb is empty, that means that there is a heaven and a hell. If the tomb is empty, that means that what we do with Jesus determines which place we're going to go. Now, if the resurrection is not true, then none of that's true. And that's why Paul writes to us in 1 Corinthians 15, where he says, if the resurrection is not true, he says, all of our faith, he says, our preaching is useless and our faith is vain. He goes on in the next verses here in 1 Corinthians 15. Just go ahead and put them up there. And in the next verses, go ahead. He says if Christ is not raised, your faith, and look at the word that he uses here, is futile. It's worthless. Like our faith, the reason why we sit here this morning on a cold, rainy Sunday in December is because the tomb is empty. If the tomb were never empty, the resurrection never happened, everything that we're doing here is futile. It's worthless. It's vain. But Mark tells us, he says this really happened. And so we're going to read here in Mark chapter 16, beginning in verse 1. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome brought spices so that they might go to anoint Jesus' body. Very early on the first day of the week, just after sunrise, they were on their way to the tomb, and they asked each other, who will roll the stone away from the entrance of the tomb? But when they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had been rolled away. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe, sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. Don't be alarmed, he said. You are looking for Jesus the Nazarene who was crucified. He has risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him. But go tell his disciples and Peter, he is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you. Trembling and bewildered, the women went out and fled from the tomb. They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. I want you to see that this good news is true news. And the first thing that Mark describes for us here, he talks about the women's expectations. These women had a certain expectation. And it's almost redundant, but in several times in these few verses, Mark tells us exactly who these women were. It was Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome. He uses these names in the end of chapter 15, the beginning of chapter 16, several different times. And I think he uses these names specifically so that he's relaying to other people the certainty of what happened. That this isn't just a legend. This actually happened, and these are the ladies who saw it. And maybe Mark is even saying, if you don't believe what I'm writing to you, these ladies may actually still be alive at this point. You can go look them up, ask them, and they're going to corroborate the story that I've written down here. That these events actually happened. They had some certain expectations, right? They expected to come to the tomb and find Jesus' body, and find him dead. I mean, if you look back up at the end of chapter 15, verse 40, it says that some women were watching from a distance. This is when Jesus is dying on the cross. Some women were watching from a distance. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James the younger, and Joseph, and Salome. In Galilee, these women had followed him and cared for his needs. Many other women who had come up with them to Jerusalem were also there. So here he tells us these same three ladies are coming to the tomb on the early morning are the same ladies who stood there and saw him die on a cross. Everyone knew that Jesus was dead. If you look down in verse 42, it was preparation day. That is the day before the Sabbath. So as evening approached, Joseph of Arimathea, a prominent member of the council, who was himself waiting for the kingdom of God, went boldly to Pilate, asked for Jesus' body. Joseph of Arimathea knew that Jesus was dead. Pilate, in the next verse, 44, Pilate was surprised to hear that he was already dead because people don't typically die that quickly from a crucifixion. And so he was surprised that he was already dead. So he summons the centurion. He asked him if Jesus had already died. When he learned from the centurion that it was so, he gave the body to Joseph. So the women knew he was dead. Joseph knew he was dead. Pilate knew he was dead. The soldier who was standing there, he knew he was dead. And then at the end of chapter 15, verse 47, Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of Joseph saw where he was laid. So they were eyewitnesses to what had happened. And they expected Jesus to be dead. They expected dead people to stay dead. That was their expectation. I heard a story one time of Cliff. Really didn't get along with his neighbor very well. And so one day Cliff was coming home from work, and there Cliff found his dog. And in the mouth of his dog was a neighbor's cat. And his dog was just shaking the life out of his cat. And so Cliff got out of his car and he picked up the cat and found that the cat was now dead. So Cliff decided that he would go to the animal shelter and look for a cat that looked almost like his neighbor's. And so he went and he looked and he looked. And he found a cat that looked, almost identical to his neighbor's dead cat. And he brought that cat home and he snuck into his neighbor's backyard and he put the cat on the back porch and he snuck back into his backyard. And just then he heard a scream from his neighbor. And he looked over the fence and he said, "What's wrong?" And he said, "You won't believe this, but our cat died a week ago and we buried it and now it's alive." Like, we're glad that dead cats stay dead, right? We expect dead cats to stay dead. We expect dead people to stay dead. That's what these women expected. They expected, they came to the tomb expecting him to be dead. Because look what it says in chapter 16, verse 1. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Salome, brought spices so that they might go to Jesus' body. They brought these things expecting him to be dead. Very early on the first day of the week, just after sunrise, they were on their way to the tomb, and they asked each other, who will roll away the stone from the entrance of the tomb, because it's going to be there, because he's dead. But when they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had been rolled away. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting at the right side, and they were alarmed. They were alarmed because they expected Jesus to be dead. Dead people stay dead. Everyone expected Jesus to be dead. That's not what they discovered. What they discovered was the tomb was empty. And they were alarmed. The word that he uses there, it says at the end of that verse, and they were alarmed. It means to be thrown into terror. All the emotions that they have running through them, they expected him to be dead, and they were saddened because he was dead. They put all their hope in this one who is now dead. And they come and find that the stone is rolled away. They find that his body is not in the tomb. And they find a young man sitting in white. We discover later he's an angel sitting there, and they are terrified. And their expectations don't meet up with their observations. And so now they need an explanation. And that's what happens next. The angel gives them an explanation. The angel's explanation, he says to them, he says, "Don't be alarmed. Yeah, right. This one that we thought was dead is not here." And he says, "Don't be alarmed," he said. "You are looking for Jesus the Nazarene who was crucified." He knew exactly what they were looking for. You're looking for Jesus the Nazarene whom you saw. You saw him die on a cross. You are expecting to find him here, but he's not here. And there are all kinds of questions as to what arises now is what happened to the body. What happened to the body? There's some who say, well, what happened to the body was really these ended up going to the wrong tomb. Well, that's kind of hard to believe because they saw where he was laid. They went back. There were soldiers that were going to be stationed there. And if they had gone to the wrong tomb, what about everybody else who comes later on? The easy way to explain that he was still dead was say, hey, here's the right tomb. He's still in the tomb. And so that can't be the case. There are others who say that what's happening here is they're just hallucinating because they're so emotional to this point that they've just hallucinated this. But in 1 Corinthians 15, Paul tells us here that Jesus appeared to more than 500 people at one time. Typically, we don't have mass hallucinations like that. Some people say that he didn't really die on a cross and he just kind of passed out, and once they laid him in the tomb, he was revived. But no, that's not what happened because Pilate knew he was dead. The Roman soldiers knew he was dead. He was dead. Some people say that the body was stolen. Well, first of all, if the enemies of Jesus have stolen the body, when they start talking, hey, Jesus is resurrected from the dead, all they have to do is bring his body out in a wheelbarrow and say, well, here he is. And we know that Jesus' followers wouldn't steal the body because they didn't expect him to rise again. They expected him to remain dead. So what happened to the body? Well, the angel goes on to explain. He says, I know you're looking for Jesus the Nazarene, but he's not here. He has risen. And it's only because of the resurrection that a lot of things make sense to us. Remember these disciples, these followers of Jesus. They were all cowards. When he was arrested, they all ran away. It's only the resurrection that really explains to us why now, after the resurrection, they were bold witnesses who oftentimes, many of them, went and died a martyr's death. It's only because of the resurrection that transformed their outlook on life. What about the number, the thousands of Jewish people that during this time left Judaism and became followers of Jesus Christ? Only the resurrection can explain that. Why would Mark tell us about these ladies who came and witnessed an empty tomb? Because in Mark's day, nobody would have said that women would have been the hero of the story. The only way that's explained is because the resurrection is true. You see, the good news is true news. Because it's true news, it is good news. And Jesus' good news meets us our bad news. Because we are destined to die. Spend eternity separated from God because of our sins. But because of the good news of the resurrection, we have life everlasting because of our faith and our trust in Jesus Christ. And I want you to see this morning, the headline this morning is this, is that the empty tomb is full. The empty tomb is full. Just think about that. Here, even after Jesus' death, he's still challenging the norm, in which he said, even though there's death, it's going to bring about life. Even though even though it appears as though there's defeat in it, there's actually victory. Even though it looks like it's the end, it's actually just the beginning. Jesus challenges the norm even in his own death, and he tells us here that the empty tomb is full. As I was thinking about this, I wrote down some things that I think that the empty tomb is full of. The empty tomb is full of peace. It's full of forgiveness. It's full of acceptance. It's full of direction and hope and joy and light. Because the tomb is empty, it is full of purpose and meaning and strength and grace. The empty tomb is full of mercy and redemption and kindness. Because the tomb is empty, it's full of contentment and power and faithfulness. Because the tomb is empty, it is full of love. The empty tomb is full. The empty tomb is full. And what happens next is we see that the empty tomb, the tomb calls out to us, the tomb's exhortation. The tomb has something that wants to say to us, and listen to what happens here. Two things that the angel says. He says, he is risen, he is not here. See the place where they laid him. The first exhortation of the empty tomb is come and see. Come and see. If you're doubting, if you're skeptical, come and see. He says it doesn't matter what your baggage is, come and see. It doesn't matter what you've done in the past, come and see. It doesn't matter what you're doing now, come and see. It doesn't matter what you will do in the future, come and see. The angel calls out to us and says, come and see. And maybe if you are skeptical about the empty tomb, you are not alone. Because in Luke's gospel, when Luke tells us about the empty tomb, the women go and tell Jesus' followers that he is alive. And Luke says that they listened to the women, and it sounded to them like nonsense. They couldn't believe it. They didn't believe that he had risen from the dead. And so you know what they did? Because they didn't believe the testimony of the women, you know what they did? They went to the tomb to check it out for themselves. And Luke tells us that John and Peter run to the tomb. And John was a little bit younger, so he was a little bit faster getting to the tomb. And so John gets to the tomb, he stands outside of the tomb, and he's just looking in. If Peter a little bit older, Peter was a little bit more brash. He catches John just standing at the outside of the tomb, and Peter runs in. It tells us that he looked, and there he saw the grave closed wide. And John walks to the tomb, and he looks, and he sees. And then Luke tells us that once they saw, they believed. And Jesus appeared to his disciples a couple times. And in John chapter 20, there's one disciple who's not there, Thomas. He gets the bad rap, right? We call him Doubting Thomas. He's not there, and he tells all of his buddies, he said, no, I'm not going to believe he's alive. So I'm going to put my fingers in the holes in his hand, and put my hand in the hole in his side. And once I do that, then I believe. And then finally Jesus arrives. Once he tells him, he says, Thomas, just come and see. Come and see. Look at the holes in my hands. Look at the spear hole in my side. Just come and see. And there John tells us that once Thomas saw that, he saw and he believed. Jesus is big enough to handle our doubts and our skepticisms and all that we carry with us. And all he's just saying, the exhortation is to come and see. And so the angel, he says to the ladies, he says, he's not here. Look at the place where they laid him. He's not here. And then the second exhortation of the empty tomb is this: not just to come and see, but to go and tell. In verse 7, but go tell his disciples and Peter. Every time I read the and Peter, it always gives me hope. Go tell his disciples, but especially make sure you tell Peter. Peter, the one who denied him 3 times. Peter, the one who said he wasn't going to deny him, the one who said he was going to follow him all the way to death. That one. Make sure you tell Peter that he's alive. Go tell his disciples and Peter. He is going ahead of you in Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you. Like, they're not standing outside the tomb counting down 3, 2, because they don't expect him to rise again. But here the angel says to the ladies, go and tell them they're going to see him just as he told them. But they still didn't believe. And it wasn't until after they saw the risen Savior that they believed. So come and see, and that's always the biblical model. Come and see, and then go and tell. Come and see, and then go and tell. Verse 8, trembling and bewildered, the women went out and fled from the tomb. They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. Now we know eventually they told somebody, right? Because the disciples ended up finding out. But they said nothing to no one because they were afraid. As I read that, I think about so oftentimes why we don't go and tell. Why don't we go and tell the world about the best news, the most pivotal moment that has ever happened in history, the good news that is true news? Why don't we go and tell? Mostly because we are afraid, and maybe even some of the fears that these women had. I'm sure the women were afraid nobody was going to believe them. And they didn't, right? Sometimes we don't go and tell because we're afraid that people won't believe us. Maybe they were afraid to go and tell because maybe they were afraid they wouldn't have all the answers, right? Sometimes we don't go and share the good news because we're afraid somebody might ask us a question that we don't know the answer to. So they were afraid. They said nothing to no. But they realized the message of the empty tomb was too great not to go and tell. And I would challenge you this morning that maybe you've been afraid. Maybe you're on one hand, maybe you're just afraid to come and see. I want you to take that step of faith and come and see that the tomb is empty. Put your faith and your trust in Christ. But maybe you have done that, but maybe you're on the other side and you're afraid to go and tell. Maybe you don't like these. I want to challenge you today to understand that this is the greatest message the world has ever heard. Greater than the tearing down of the Berlin Wall. Greater than anything else that the world has ever heard. The tomb is empty. Come and see. Go and tell. Because the empty tomb is full. And there are people in their lives who desperately need to hear life was the redemption and forgiveness and love and joy and peace that's only found in the empty tomb. Come see. Go and tell. Mark was a young man who grew up in the Philippines. One day, a family named White man walked into his village. And they were kind of he gave Mark a copy of the translation of the Gospel of Mark. And Mark read through and he read about all the miraculous things that Jesus had done, how Jesus helped all the people who were lame, all the things that Jesus had done. And Mark said he went through that to Mark chapter 15, Jesus died, named the end of Mark chapter 15, and Mark said he took that Gospel of Mark and he threw it. He discussed it. He said, I can't believe a God that is that powerful. God is as powerful as we're told he is. Why would he allow his son to die? I mean, our headhunters and the protectors of our village would go to the death to protect us. But this God left his own son to die. Nard was walking away, and Nard said he heard God speak to him. He said, Nard, don't you see that's how much I love you? Nard said he went back and he picked up the Gospel of Mark and he read Mark chapter 16. As he finished reading it, he gave his life to Jesus Christ because the empty tomb was full. And there he saw for the first time in his life the amazing love that the eternal God of heaven had for him. And it transformed him forever. And Nard became one who came and saw. And then ultimately he went and told the next village over. And the next village over. And became a great evangelist for God. Because the tomb is empty. Father, we thank you for your word today. We thank you for the fact that the tomb is empty, and because of that, it changes everything. God, I pray that we, as your people, that we would be bold to go and tell. Go and tell about the one who left the glories of heaven, was born in a manger, was obedient unto death, even the death on a cross, but yet rose again from the dead to give everlasting life to all who would just believe. So as the tomb calls out us, even over this Christmas holiday, that we would come and see and go and tell. And do this all for the glory and the honor and the praise of our Savior, Jesus